I've had some requests for Chapter 2 of Beast of the Ozarks, Book 1, First Kill. So I molded around. I decided, why not? So hope you guys enjoy it. Here's Chapter 2 to Beast of the Ozarks. Red and blue lights filled the darkness of the morning as 211 raced down the drive to the Overton home. He is met outside by Peter Overton. Holding his deer rifle, 211 slowly got out of his patrol car. "Hey, Peter, it's me, Clay. Would you mind lowering your rifle?" Peter hesitated for a moment, then quickly blinked his eyes. "Oh, hey, Clay, sorry." Peter lowered his rifle, and Deputy Clay Walker walked over to him. Deputy Clay grew up with Peter and never knew the man to fear anything. Hell, once they were camping out in the middle of nowhere when they were surrounded by some old shiners. I thought they were there to raid their steel. Peter whooped all three of their asses and took their shine for jumping to the conclusions and coming after them. Now, the man before him, he could see nothing but utter fear from this man. Clay placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "Hey, Pete, how about you tell me what has you scared?" Peter said nothing for a moment. Then he looked into Clay's eyes. "Clay, you will not believe me if I told you. Shit, I'm not sure I believe it myself, but I saw the damn thing, Clay. I fucking saw it. And I swear upon anything holy, it is not of this world." Clay rolled around what his friend had just told him. He did not want to believe him, but one thing remained. He had never known Peter to fear anything, and Peter was terrified at this moment. Nodding, Clay steadied Peter's eyes. "Tell me what happened, Pete. This is not like you, boy. Tell me everything that happened." Peter frowned. "Smith and I were awoken around 5 this morning. We both heard a strange roar off in the hill over there." Peter pointed to the hilltop behind his pasture. "We looked out in the darkness for a spell. Not seeing anything, we decided to go back inside when Samantha saw what looked like a woman. We saw her just for a moment. Then bam, she was gone. It was like something lifted her and yanked her into the woods." Peter looked at the ground and shuffled his feet. He had gone silent. Clay looked around for a moment. "Come on, Pete. Spit it out, boy. You're holding something back. Now listen, if I'm going to solve this case, I need to know all the details." Clay could see the argument playing out in his friend's eyes. Then Peter spoke. "Clay, it was a monster that killed that poor girl. Now, before you say anything, now, I know what you're thinking. Hell, I thought the same way before I saw it. I'm telling you, son, it was a fucking monster, and the damn thing is pure evil. Hell, I'm even debating on selling my farm, moving as far away from this place as possible." Clay thought about what Peter just told him. "Poor shit, Pete. You love this land, and it has been in your family for generations. There cannot be anything out there that can chase you off this land." Peter's eyes grew large. "Exactly. So that should tell you something. Look, Clay, I know what I saw. That thing stepped out of the woods with that young woman's body in his hands. That damn thing stared at me. My body shook in fear. The fucking thing is not natural. I cannot have Samantha and youngins around here with that thing here." Clay put his hands up and surrendered. "Calm yourself, Pete. I believe you. It's just hard to grasp that thought." Sirens could be heard in the distance, and they both knew that Sheriff Benson would soon be joining them. Clay turned to Peter. "Go inside and sit with the family. I will tell Mark all that you've told me. Then we can begin to figure out what we're going to do next." Peter nodded and headed back inside. Seconds later, Sheriff Benson came to a sliding halt in the gravel driveway. He got out of his F-150 and put his sheriff's cowboy hat on. Then he shifted his duty belt and shut the door to his truck. He walked over to Clay. "Hey, Clay, has it been a busy night?" Clay shook his head no. "Nah, Sheriff. It's been quiet for the most part. Listen, Mark, this is no ordinary call. Peter is shaken to the point of selling the farm and leaving." Mark squinted his eyes at Clay. "I know, Mark, but I tell you, whatever they saw scared the life out of Peter, and he is not the same." Mark looked at the front door. "Very well. Give me a minute to check on them. Get yourself ready and call in for assistance. I do not care where you pull the help from. Just get more bodies out here to help us look over the area. Clay nodded that he understood, and Mark went to the house. Mark heard Clay put on out the call. 211 to dispatch. Go ahead, 211. Janet's voice came over the radio. Please put 001 on site. Please get additional units to our location. Have EMT standing by, Clay requested. Roger that, 211. I show 001 on location and additional backup from Pineville PD and State Patrol. We'll be at your location in 15. Mark went to the trunk of his patrol car. Hitting the button on his key fob, the trunk opened. He reached in, grabbed his flak vest and service rifle. Pausing for a second, the thought of the thing that Peter described, he reached in his duty bag and grabbed his .40 caliber HK USB FS. He placed 4 additional mags for his pistol in the pockets of his vest. He closed the trunk and went to the backyard. He wanted to look at the tree line as he waited for backup. As he slowly scanned the tree line, he noticed something. There, just on the inside, says something out of place. He swore it did not fit with the surroundings. Whatever it was massive. Then something else caught his attention. It looked like some kind of clothing. Then the out-of-place thing turned and went back into the woods. "Fuck!" shouted Clay. He hollered into the house. "The fucking thing was on the edge of the tree line. It has the victim. I'm going after it." Clay darted for the tree line, and he did not hear Mark shout out for him to wait. He had the perp and the victim together, and he would not let them out of his sight. It was a good distance between the backyard and the tree line. Clay was an Army Ranger, and the distance with the weight of his duty gear was something that he was used to. In the distance, he could hear more sirens coming, but he could not wait for them. He knew that he had to keep this thing in his sight if they were going to stop it. He was breathing heavily as he reached the tree line. He stopped and studied the trees and land beyond. Not seeing anything out of the ordinary, Clay slowly made his way into the woods. Reverting to his ranger days, he steadied his train, looking for anything out of place. He quietly and smoothly walked through the woods. The old adage from his time in the military, slow is smooth is fast, raced through his brain. Looking around, he found a large puddle of blood just 6 feet into the tree line. The amount of blood that was down there could only mean one thing. This was a spot where the poor woman was killed. He worked his way around the puddle of blood so that not to contaminate the crime scene. His eyes constantly looked all around, and he felt a heaviness in the air. He noticed how deathly quiet the woods were. This made him feel uneasy. He could hear the other units coming to a stop at the house. It would not be long before the others caught up to him. Then he froze. Something wet dropped from the trees and landed on his right shoulder. He slowly looked up, and much to his surprise, it was a creature straight out of a horror sci-fi movie, about 30 foot up. He noticed the chewed remains of a woman in the beast's hands. It had to be the victim, he thought to himself. Without hesitation, he brought his rifle up and began to pour lead into the beast. It roared out in pain as the high-velocity, scalding hot lead ripped through its body. The beast dropped the remains of the victim and tore through the treetops. Clay took chase, sending rounds of death hurtling through the air at his target. The beast's roar echoed through the countryside, and broken limbs came crashing to the ground. Clay's bolt locked back on his patrol rifle. He quickly hit the magazine release and flipped the AR sideways, sending the empty mag flying away. With one swift motion, the magazine was freed and a new one took its place. Hitting the bolt release, the bolt slammed forward and chambered another round. Back at the Overton home, the other units showed up on the scene. Sheriff Benson was outside talking to them when the rifle fire broke the stillness of the morning, followed shortly with a roar like none have heard before. Peter ran inside, clearly shaken up from the roar. The other officers quickly put their gear on and headed for the woods. Mark tried to reach his deputy on the radio. 211, this is 001. Come in, 211. What is your 20? The radio was silent. Mark tried again, and more shots could be heard from the woods behind the farm. 211, come in, damn it, respond, that is an order. Still, the radio was silent. 001 to dispatch. Go ahead, replied Jeanette. Roger, 211 engaging target. Shots have been fired. Call in all units on or off shift. Continue call for 211. The rest of us will reach him on foot, ordered Mark. With that being said, Mark and the others quickly hopped in their vehicles and raced to the wood line. Clay was in trouble and they needed to reach him quickly. Sounds of units from law enforcement agencies called out they were en route to their location. When they reached the wood line, Mark had Deputy Bryan stay with the vehicles as the others made their ways into the woods. Gunshots, roars, and a man yelling echoed through the mountains. Mark knew he had to make it to Clay fast. He needed to back up his deputy and his friend. They found the puddle of blood in the tree line and a trail of brass from Clay. They followed it. They still could hear roars and gunshots off in the distance, but it did not sound like it was very far away. They quickened their pace and headed to the aid of their fellow officer. There were large droplets of blood on the ground that followed the path of the expended brass. They all kept their eye on the surroundings. None of them knew what they were running into. Nothing about this made sense to them. Not long after, they came upon the chewed remains of what they believed was the victim. Mark left a deputy behind with the remains. They needed to keep the remains safe, not only to give closure to the family, but also evidence to catch the killer. There was no blood coming from the body. The claw marks were strange, but they had no time to study it at this moment. From the lower jaw up, the victim's head was gone. All that remained was blood-stained flesh, tear marks, and teeth from the lower jaw. This caused a couple of the officers to vomit. Mark pushed them on, and they continued their search for Clay. It hit Mark. There had not been a gunshot, roar, or a yell for a spell now. This caused fear and concern to creep into Mark's brain. He could only hope that Clay was okay. They found the bloody McDonald County Sheriff's badge laying on the ground. Part of the shirt was still clung to the back. They came upon a couple of buildings in the middle of the woods. Mark thought about it for a moment. This is the carpenter's home. There seemed to be no one home. The door was smashed in, and the vehicle was in the drive. Mark and a few others slowly made their way inside. Flies and the smell of decay were thick, and Mark instantly knew that there was something dead inside, and it had been dead for a while. He turned his flashlight on, and what was illuminated by his light almost caused him to vomit. Scattered all over the living room were what looked like the shredded remains of possible two individuals. Officer Robert of Missouri State Highway Patrol gasped. Who the hell are the remains, and what the fuck happened here? Mark sighed. I would say this is what remains of Dan Carpenter and his old lady, Beth Ring. They are a couple of drug-dealing lowlifes. I have personally arrested them for meth several times. They checked the rest of the house but found no other remains. Officer Robert stopped Mark. How do you know who the remains belong to? It could be anybody. There's not enough to possibly ID anyone. Mark walked over to a partial arm. Dan had a "fuck the cops" tattoo just on his left forearm. That and the car in the drive is his. Then he walked over to a tuft of hair hanging from the ceiling. See this pink-colored hair? Beth dyed her hair pink the last time I saw her. I've not seen them in 5 days. I guess this could be why. My guess is they both were strung out and were killed because of that. He pointed to the meth crystal strung out all over the floor. He left one of the Pineville PD officers there to secure the scene. They continued with their search for Clay. Mark grew increasingly worried, for they had still not heard anything from Clay. It took them a minute to pick the trail up again. There were small droplets of fresh blood on the ground leading back into the trees. They followed it. Mark had hoped that droplets were Clay's, and it meant that he was still alive. After 20 minutes, the trail led to County Road SE 9056A. The woods opened up into a field just on the other side of it. There was a thick fog covering the field. They cautiously made their way to the field. None of them knew what lay ahead, and each of them were on edge. What they all have witnessed so far was something from a horror movie, and it was hard to believe that it was real. There, in the middle of the field, stood something straight out of imagination. It was massive and around 14 foot tall. The fog made it hard to make out. It looked to be covered in muscles, and blood trickled from all over its body. They could tell that this was what Clay had been shooting and chasing. The beast emitted straight evil and horror. They all froze at the sight of it. They all could not move and did not know what to do. They all questioned themselves if what they were seeing was real or trick of the mind. In its right hand was a vest that looked to be that of McDonald County Sheriff's Department. Mark felt anger rising up in him and let out a painful, angry yell and began to unload on the beast. Fog obscured the true sight of the beast, but Mark did not care. He charged the beast, firing his shot.